Hey, it's at the letters for Thursday, February 25th. Arden Zwelling and Ben Nicholson Smith, our producers, as always. Mike Tassoni, Christian Ryan. We thank them very much for their hard work in getting this podcast out to you, the listeners, and we thank you for listening. Ben, every day right now is just like a reminder of how much I wish I was at spring training and how much I wish I was like around the club and covering it. And the one that I got yesterday was when we were talking to Rowdy Tellez via Zoom, and he was describing the live BP that he stood in for against Alek Manoah. And that got me thinking, oh, yeah, watching live BPs right now would be really cool because you so seldom get to watch these players actually face off against one another and actually compete against one another. So, like, just hearing about what Rowdy described as a sumo match between him and Manoah got me kind of thirsting to see some live BPs. If you could see like one live BP from this year's camp, what matchup would really intrigue you?
Oh, wow. Well, I
I
can
know
tell
I'm
you the
putting you on the
hitter.
spot. Sorry.
No,
Go
all
ahead.
good. So the hitter would be Vlad Jr. And usually they do these things in groups where the hitters rotate through.
Yeah.
So I'll create George Springer, Vlad, Bo, and Kirk in a group. That'll be the hitting group. Usually it's in fours, as you know, obviously. And then the pitcher, man, that's a good one. You know what? It might be your guy, Simeon Woods Richardson.
Yeah.
Someone I haven't seen a lot of. And someone who's very promising. Of course, you had the big read this week on sportsnet.ca. And yeah, I think it'd be fun to watch him. See, some of this Blue Jays pitching, that next wave up close. So that would be my answer. What about you?
Yeah, that would be cool to watch. I would actually like to see Simeon Woods Richardson versus Jordan Groshans because, like, the stories you hear from the alt site is that those two guys had some like pretty epic battles, and we're like really going back and forth with one another. And those are two of the more competitive guys in the organization, and two guys who are clearly trying to prove something early in their careers. And also the crazy thing about that alt site experience for a lot of those guys it's pretty limited players there, right? You had all the guys on the major league side and like a taxi squad on the big league side. So if you're Simeon Woods Richardson, you're facing the same hitters over and over and over again. So he would have faced Groshans like 30, 40, 50 times over the course of a couple weeks. You get a pretty good idea of what the other guy's good at, what he likes, what he doesn't like. You know what I mean? Like Jordan Groshans will know how Simeon Woods Richardson likes to sequence and likes to set up his pitches. And likewise, like, Simeon would know where to attack around the zone. So it'd be cool to kind of watch that develop and watch that sort of cat and mouse game play out a little bit for two guys who know each other really well.
Well, think about the times through the order penalty, right? And the hitter
Yeah.
progressively gets an advantage as you go through the game. You see him a second, third time. Those guys were seeing each other 60 or 70 times. I mean, I'm sure that Groshans in that example would have developed some familiarity. So for sure, I mean, a lot of layers to it. It's a good chance to just familiarize yourself with some of those newcomers to Blue Jays camp. Of course, there are lots of those on the pitching side, guys like Chatwood or Matz or Robbie Ray, of course, was around at the end of last year. But yeah, it's always a fun time, and so we're limited to the footage that we see, like everybody else. And it is nice to see the action starting to happen. It'll be nice to have a game to watch this Sunday. But yeah,
Yeah.
of course, you can't compare to the real thing.
No. Give me like Ryu versus Biggio.
Yeah,
Ryu just like painting the corners as he does, and Biggio having like the elite plate like or pitch selection and like plate vision that he does. Give me like Trent Thornton versus Joe Panic. Like two of the kind of like I know that's off the board, but two of like the scrappier kind of
yeah.
guys, two kind of like bulldog competitors. Like that battle could go a dozen pitches deep easily because Panic will just be fouling everything off. And Thornton will be like, well, here's my fifth pitch. And here's actually my sixth pitch that I haven't used yet. That's where my mind's at right now. And
Panic
wishing I
versus
was in
Thornton. Get
W.
Arden down there, folks. He really wants to see some live BPs.
Speaking of guys like Thornton, and you mentioned Robbie Ray, and just kind of the cavalcade of pitchers who are in camp right now. What do you think we've learned in the first week just about how this pitching staff is going to shake out, how the Blue Jays are going to deploy some of these arms, and what it might look like in 2021?
The one thing I point to here is Tyler Chatwood and his role. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway to this point, and it's pretty straightforward. The Blue Jays are going to use him as a reliever, potentially a kind of multi-inning reliever. Charlie Montoyo said sometime after the sixth inning, sort of like the way they used Julian Merriweather last year. So, that's kind of the first name that we can cross off of the list for the competition for the rotation spots available in Blue Jays camp. And Chatwood, obviously has, as you've written about, he's got some high spin stuff. He's got some velocity that has played up in the past when he's pitched out of the bullpen. And there was a chance when he signed that he would be starting, but they've decided to go in a different direction. So honestly, that's, it's not huge news by any stretch, but that's probably my biggest takeaway so far.
Yeah, it's interesting the comparison to the Julian Merriweather role from last season, because Merriweather was a guy who, it wasn't just strictly like a one inning appearance. Like the Blue Jays typically tried to get him up to 2 innings, and even like measuring by innings is kind of outdated.
Sure.
Like it was typically like 6 to 9 batters was
Yeah.
sort of the frame, and so it sounds like that's how Tyler Chatwood's going to be used. I wonder if that's how Ryan Baracki kind of gets used as well. I don't know that he's necessarily just a 3 or 4 batter guy. Like I think you could take a trip through the order, and I wonder if the Blue Jays are building sort of that like middle tier of relievers on this staff for guys like, and Merriweather might end up in this like class as well if he doesn't end up being a starter this year. He's being stretched out right now because the Blue Jays are stretching out as many pitchers as possible just to keep their options open. But a guy like Merriweather, Baracki, Chatwood could be that dude who comes in after your starter goes 2 trips through and you don't want him to see a third, and takes that third trip through and kind of bridges things to maybe the back end of the bullpen to your Rafael DeLises and Jordan Romanos and Kirby Yateses of the world.
Right. And I mean, you really will need those bridge type of starters. You look at the schedule for the Blue Jays, and I don't think it's too early to do this, but for the first couple weeks of the season, they basically have one off day, and it's the second day of the season. So they play once, have an off day, then they go 2 weeks straight with basically no days off. And this is after 60 game season. This is after, a lot of, uncertainty as far as the ramp up to the 2021 season. I don't think that we see guys out of the gate going 110 pitches. I think that there's going to be some caution there, and that will mean that the Blue Jays need to have guys capable of filling in those gaps, those middle innings. So Chatwood could be one of those guys. Merriweather could be. And then it's kind of interesting. In the second half of the month of April, they have 4 off days. So at that point, probably want to shorten up the rotation, in fact, maybe go with a bigger bench. But, that's kind of details for a couple months from now. But I do think the need exists for those multi-inning relievers.
Well, let me ask you this. Considering that early season schedule, how quickly or like how long do you think it'll be before the Blue Jays get to a 6th starter making a start this season?
Oh, it could be early,
right?
Yeah, it could
That's
be
kind of
the
where I'm leading you
first.
here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it might
could
be
the-
right away.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there's pretty good reason, especially if, and some of this comes down to health. But let's say that Thornton is throwing great, and Pearson, of course, is throwing well, and Ray is healthy, and they also want to see Steven Matz. Well, maybe you just give everyone an extra day of rest. We know Ryu likes that. We know they want to be cautious with Pearson. I mean, it's all situational, and if Pearson, if there's a rain delay and Pearson's pulled after, there are all these little situational things that figure in. But I won't be surprised at all if they go to their 6th starter on the 10th day of the season.
That's why like even talking about it as a 5-man rotation is just like completely, it's a misnomer, right? There's no more such thing as a 5-man rotation. It's a pitching staff is the way that you have to look at it. Let me put, I know I'm throwing lots of weird questions at you.
No,
Let me put it to you this way. Come the end of the season, let's just assume that Hyun-Jin Ryu leads the Toronto Blue Jays in innings pitched.
Mhm.
And I understand that's a dangerous assumption given his injury history, but let's just make that assumption. Hyun-Jin Ryu leads Toronto Blue Jays in innings pitched. Who do you think finishes second?
Pearson, if things go well,
right?
At like 150.
Yeah. Because or could easily be Robbie Ray. Could easily
at 150.
be at 150. Could
Yeah.
easily be Tanner Roark at 150.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of think the Blue Jays, when all is said and done, might have this pitching staff with Hyun-Jin Ryu leading the team in innings pitched, assuming health,
175.
and then like 7 or 8 guys who are over 70 innings pitched,
Yeah.
but below 150,
Yeah.
who are
Agreed.
in that murky middle.
Yeah, it's a tough way to go, but I think that's likely what we're going to see. Like I'll put it to you this way, and this is a bit of a preemptive over under here, as we of course anticipate another edition of our over unders in a month or so. But if I said to you over under 1.5 pitchers who exceed 150 innings, are you taking the over?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
I
not.
wouldn't either.
No.
Which is kind of crazy for a
Yeah.
team that, we both agree is a contender. We both think this is a good team, but this might be a good team that succeeds with like a whole mix and match approach to their pitching staff.
Yeah, that's the way they're built, and that's the way that I think baseball is trending this way. And I think that when we're having this conversation, or when like two younger and better and more attractive people are having this conversation in 10 years,
Right.
I think that you're not going to be talking about 180 inning starters anymore, 190 inning starters. I don't even know if you're going to be talking about a rotation. I think you're going to be talking about just the pitching staff and just the out getters, and guys get outs at different times of the game, and it's a fluid, alive thing that is measured from game to game and week to week and month to month based on recovery and based on biomechanical data and based on pitch tracking and based on motion capture and the way the teams can measure arm slots and release points and deliveries and mechanics and really like hone in on a lot of the data that tells them exactly just how fresh their pitchers are, exactly who's going to be successful going forward and who needs to be backed off a day and who's recovering well. All these measures of strength and endurance and durability. Like I just think that's where pitching is ultimately going, instead of just like you are the starter and you start every 5th day and you go 7 or 8 innings. There might be like a very, very upper echelon class of guys in the game who can do that. Like there might still be a Scherzer kicking around and a Verlander type kicking around, but like other than that, like I think it's just going to be you get outs, and I'm not going to tell you when we're going to ask you to get outs, but you get outs when we ask you to get outs, and don't worry about how many numbers are under your game started column.
And I agree that we'll see that in 10 years. But I mean, like, are we not kind of there now functionally? Like, I
Yeah.
know that the term still exists. And I think that some people within major league organizations still think in terms of 5-man rotations. And I think others don't. I think that others are already at the point where it's just kind of like, all right, we're getting outs and we need, you know, 27 times 162 of those. And we gotta get those.
Yeah.
So I kind of think we're already there.
No, totally. And it plays into matchups as well, and it plays into your scouting of the opponent and how you think you can exploit their weaknesses. I mean, it plays into current form and, like you said, circumstances. It all kind of plays together. But I think that the Blue Jays is going to be a lot more fluid and flexible this year. Even with lineup construction, like batting orders. People are running out like, oh, this is what the batting order is going to be. Who's going to lead off? This who's going to hit third. I don't know. It might look different every day, man.
Yeah,
Look,
it usually does.
right?
Most years, like if there's a page on Baseball Reference that has this, most years, major league teams these days use like 110. I want to say, I'll look it up, but I think it's over 100 lineups in a given year.
I have it because I just wrote it the other day. Last season, 60-game season, the Blue Jays used 56 different lineups. In a 60-game season. So I don't expect that to be any different this year. As the Blue Jays continue to try to sort of maximize their flexibility and maximize versatility. I mean, that's why you're seeing like Lourdes Gurriel Jr. taking ground balls at third base. And that's why Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is taking ground balls at third base, and why George Springer is going to play some right during spring training, even though he should be in center field every day. Like the Marcus Simeon, right, is going to see time at different spots. Joe Panik's probably got a role to play on this team. Like that flexibility, that versatility is key to deploying your roster in the way that the Blue Jays want to. So and that extends to like the projections of what the 26-man roster is going to be on opening day. It's not about the 26. it's about like the 34.
Okay.
It's about like the Blue Jays really by the end of it are going to have like a core of like 34, 35 players that they rely on this year. And they're going to have a lot of guys on the edges of the roster, particularly in the bullpen, who are going up and down, up and down, up and down. It's not just 26. It's about the depth of your 40, and particularly kind of the upper 32, 34 of that 40. And I think that's where the Blue Jays will likely succeed or fail this year, is just in the depth and how they backfill for injuries and how they backfill for underperformance.
Agreed. So let me ask you this: as far as these different avails that we've been, participating on, very similar to this. You're on your Zoom setup, as am I, and we're talking to these different Blue Jays players. What stood out to you about the first kind of week or so of talking to these guys for the first time? And it's been a while since we last heard from them.
Nothing's really stood out, to be honest with you. What
Yeah.
stood out to you? Like I can't, like, it's been pretty run of the mill, man.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I would say the Springer stuff has stood out to me a little bit,
Yeah.
just as far as, it's not like he's going out there and making these big, bold, declarative statements in the same way that we've seen from guys like, obviously, Bo Bichette saying that, World Series is a possibility, Rowdy Tellez, Alek Manoah. There's a lot of World Series talk from the Jays. And that's, certainly weren't saying that last year in 2019, with good reason. So I think in contrast to that, George Springer is more understated, but it was interesting to me to see that he seemed to show kind of some genuine humility when it came to his approach to spring training and being a teammate. And I think this stuff can be overwrought at times, and I sometimes it honestly comes off as disingenuous, even if these guys are totally genuine about it. But for whatever reason, I kind of bought it with Springer, where he was saying like, it's not my job it's not everyone else's job to try to fit to me, even as this new big addition. He's saying it's his job to essentially get to know everyone else, to fit into the group. And he's saying that, he wants to play a lot of spring games. He wants to go on the road on these little bus trips that the Jays will be making.
Right.
And I don't know. I bought it. Maybe he's fooling me and maybe it's BS, but I actually bought it, and it seemed like some genuine humility from their biggest star.
Well, I think it matters with him because, like, I've always believed that your team culture is your best player. Like, your best player sets that. It's a top down thing, Like, I don't know, like Santiago Espinal isn't setting the team culture on the Toronto Blue
No,
Jays.
he is not.
So, in my opinion, George Springer is the Toronto Blue Jays best player. So that is where your culture is set. And everybody falls in behind that. So those are the things you want to hear from George Springer. And even just thinking about sort of the Blue Jays philosophy organizationally in acquiring talent and making commitments to players, they would not have spent the amount of money on George Springer and made the type of term commitment George Springer that they would have if they had not done some extremely serious due diligence on this guy's character and makeup and how he is in the clubhouse and what they felt he could provide culture wise. This is something that the Blue Jays think about a lot. And I think that, like, you're right, like there was a little bit of humility there from him, but there is also like a bit of that edge as well and a bit of that swagger and that confidence that you see from like a Bo Bichette. And Kevin Biggio in a subtler way, and I think George Springer has that as well. He spoke about enjoying the confidence around the team and enjoying hearing his teammates talk about wanting to win World Series and about setting those expectations high. And this is something that's been coming up. I think we talked about it last week or a couple of weeks ago. It's something that's been coming up through the minor league system with guys like
Mhm.
Bichette and like Groshans has it, Manoah has it, Simeon Woods Richardson has it. Like people are about to start learning as these guys get tried out in front of cameras during Zooms, and particularly when they're on the mound. Like just wait until people watch Simeon Woods Richardson pitch and realize what this guy's about. Like just wait until people see Alek Manoah in a game and realize like,
Yeah.
holy crap, like these guys are really confident and really kind of mean on the field. They really are, man. Like
Yeah.
they're coming right at you. Like they're not afraid, and they want to beat you like really desperately. Like the Blue Jays, I feel in their hiring, like in the front office, or like developers, coordinators, they kind of actually look for a bit of humility and a little bit of open mindedness and like an ability to say like, hey, I don't know the answers. You tell me, and let's work collaboratively. And I don't know if they want that necessarily, that egotistical nature in the people who are grooming these young players, but I think in the young players they very much want that like screw you. They want that edge and that cockiness. Like I think I very much want that like innate competitiveness, like much of what we have seen from Bo Bichette over his first few years in the majors. And I think Sir George Springer has a little bit of that and is going to fit in well with that.
It's interesting, right? And some guys, totally need that. I think, you think back to Donaldson,
Yeah.
the way he would approach those things between the lines, like that's a fired up dude between the lines for any even beyond them. Sometimes Stroman, of course, very competitive. So for some guys, it's just the way they work. And I think for Springer, I actually sense like a different, and we're just getting more familiar with how he operates, but I sense a little bit of a different approach. Like he's saying, and maybe it's a product of he's already had so much success in the major leagues, and there's less to prove in a way. But I sense from him that there's a little bit less of that, and he's even saying to us in these Zoom calls, like, I will fail, I will make
Yeah.
mistakes, I'm not going to deliver every time. And of course, that's true in any walk of life. Like if you're a Michelin star chef, probably not every meal is amazing. Maybe that's the wrong example. For most people, you're going to have days that are better and days that are worse. And Springer's acknowledging that. And some of these players, like that's not something that we would necessarily hear from Bo Bichette, just different personalities. But it's been interesting to get to hear some of the perspectives from Springer because, like you said, he is the guy who's probably most responsible for setting the tone now.
You know where that like really materialized for me last year, and it's just kind of more impactful the more I think about it, was the like playing in Buffalo and the home record that the Blue Jays had in Buffalo at that ballpark. Like the Blue Jays, like going into that season, going into every home game, had this like baked in excuse for, well, here's why we weren't good tonight. And like, here's why this season didn't go right for us because we were essentially on the road the entire year. Remember they started the year on like a like 3-week road trip without an off day and like just an absurd schedule.
Whole season
Uh,
was a road trip,
yeah,
basically.
but like it was really bad for the
Yeah,
first few weeks of the season. And then they just like they got to Buffalo and they really did make that a competitive advantage for themselves. They really did kind of like rally around. And it's like you were saying earlier, man, some of this stuff can be disingenuous and eye rolling, right? And like I understand completely, but I do think there is something to that. And I think like there is something to the Blue Jays kind of needing to fight against falling into this trap of like believing like, well, we're up against it. Like we're playing in Dunedin, right? You even hear a lot of the talk about how the ballpark's going to play. Like Blue Jays pitchers can't be going into these games thinking, oh man, I'm going to give up 100 home runs and it's going to get up into that jet stream. And like they have to go into it thinking like, I'm going to find a way to use this to my advantage and
yeah,
I'm going to like rally around this. Because like even just subconsciously thinking that things aren't going to go well when you go into anything. It's like you were saying in any walk of life, but especially in a professional sports atmosphere, just having that subconscious thought of like, this isn't going to go well for me. Well, then, yeah, like self-fulfilling prophecy, things
sure.
probably aren't going to go well for you. Like I can't tell you how many coordinators and hitting coaches I've talked to about not having fear at the plate and not being afraid to like strike out and to be embarrassed on national television, right? And to swing and miss at nasty stuff. Like the longer I cover this game, the more I talk to people in it and people who play at the highest level, like just the more I value that mental side of it and that psychological aspect and just the insane mental challenges that go into playing this game at the highest level and just how important mentality and approach and self-talk is to being successful at this level. I think it's so important.
Without a doubt. And we've heard from guys in the last week who have been talking about just that. I mean, Rowdy Tellez telling us that he spent a lot of the off season reading, and I don't want to say self-help, but more kind of conceptual books about what you were just talking about, ways to improve, ways to approach different challenges. That's on the mental side. Or Vladdy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's talking about, hey, I've lost 42 pounds, but along with the quickness that he feels, he's also feeling more mentally ready for the season from what he told us via interpreter just the other day. So I think that there's no doubt that that mental side of things is hugely important for any type of athletic feats, any type of performance, which obviously these guys are in. Just two quick points on Springer to wrap that part up. I
Yeah.
think one, probably some people are listening right now and they're saying, well, this is a guy who cheated. and someone who, whose success and who's gotten to this point in his career because he cheated. All right. I mean, he did. They banged the trash cans. He benefited from that. That's true. So just acknowledging that. And then secondly, I thought, there's a comment that Tellez relayed to us from Springer about how they kind of approach different teammates, in particular minor league teammates who are coming up. And I thought it was really interesting that Tellez, in recounting what Springer said, pointed out that these guys, these minor leaguers who are coming up, are going to be their future teammates. They're going to be Blue Jays in 2 or 3 or 4 years. So why would you go out of your way to make them uncomfortable, to go through this kind of hazing process that, of course, is embedded within a lot of different sports? But it seems like Springer and Tellez are kind of looking at that and they're like, this is kind of dumb. Like, these guys are about to be our teammates. Like, why are we just going to essentially bully them?
Oh yeah, I mean, some of the stories you hear from back in the day about the
Yeah.
things that, like, not even just minor leaguers, like rookies in the
Yeah.
big leagues were made to withstand, and like some of the treatment and punishment. Like you think about a little bit of the like reckoning that hockey has gone through with hazing over recent years. Like I don't know if it's going to come for baseball, or if some of those stories are going to come to light. But yeah, there's like a lot of like foul stuff that occurred. So no, absolutely, I think creating fostering an environment where players feel comfortable to be themselves, and and feel like they're a part of something is important. I think the Blue Jays have put a lot of work into that, and it was always going to go that way because like a Bo Bichette comes into the Blue Jays environment at 17 or 18, having like spent quite a bit of time around professional baseball growing up, having made a pretty substantial bonus through the draft, like having quite a bit of pedigree. Same thing, Kevin Biggio, not so much the bonus, but the pedigree there. Obviously the pedigree of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Like these weren't guys that were going to, come in and be those rookie whipping boys. Like, these are guys who came in as like pretty fully formed professionals. You know what I mean? Like they did have a little bit of that leg up just by their upbringing. So I think it started there. And then you're right, it does, progress forward with guys like not just Rowdy, but like, Danny Jansen and Ryan Baraki and Jordan Romano, Nate Pearson, who are all working out in Dunedin over the winter, rubbing shoulders with minor leaguers. The Blue Jays had like off-season development camps throughout the winter, and minor leaguers coming in and out the whole time, watching big leaguers work, getting to know them. Yeah, there is, there is something to that, and I think it's changed quite a bit. Just kind of the atmosphere around a major league clubhouse here in 2021 versus even just 10 years ago.
Yeah. And, I don't think the Blue Jays are alone in this. I don't think baseball is alone in these changes. I think it's obviously society wide and sports, encompassing a lot of different sports as well. But of course, we see the Blue Jays much more than we see other teams and hear from them much more. And it's interesting to observe for sure.
Yeah, and it ties into a lot of other aspects of the organization, including the new player development complex that we're all going to get a look at here on Thursday, and a bunch of other things that are going on. Maybe we can talk about those in the second half of the podcast when it continues on At the Letters. It continues on At the Letters. Arden Zwelling, Ben Nicholson Smith. Our producers are Christian Ryan and Mike Tassoni. Ben, you alluded to it in the first half of the podcast. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has dropped 42 pounds. The offseason conditioning and the work that actually really began at the beginning of summer camp, which would have been early last July. Clearly starting to pay some dividends with some improved body composition. The Blue Jays hope, and he hopes, a bit more agility, a bit more quickness in the field and on the base pass, and maybe some smoother swing mechanics as well, with just a more efficient movement profile with a slim down frame. What does it all mean? Like, how does that translate to big league success, do you think?
So, I mean, starting with the behind the scenes work and then progressing to how it actually manifests on the field, I think behind the scene, and this is kind of based on what Vladdy told us through Hector LeBron, and other stuff that you hear from people around the team. So if he's in better shape, which obviously he is, then that will allow him to go out into the field and take more ground balls, for example, without getting tired. That was one example that Vladdy cited in talking to us. Is he can go out there, he's not feeling fatigued after 10 or 15 ground balls, he can keep going. And then with more reps, he becomes smoother. He's able to put in that work. He's able to develop defensively, for example. Same goes for swings in the cage. And then the same goes for his recovery. If he does stay out there for a few dozen extra ground balls, then that next day, he's more likely to feel like himself. And he's more likely to be able to go out there and do the same thing and continue that improvement. So that's the behind the scenes work. And then in a game, if he's a little bit quicker, which is his word to describe it, then he's more likely to be able to make that play defensively. He's more likely to be able to stretch a single into a double. Those balls that he lasers off the wall, some of those were singles last year. And maybe those become doubles in 2021, which helps. I mean, maybe he's a little bit more able to score from first on a double or from second on a single. So those little things add up. And his swing, too, could be just a little bit more efficient. And the movement, I mean, this is way out of my depth, but
Yeah.
the movements within his swing could be a bit more athletic and efficient. So he's a big guy. He's always probably going to be a big guy. And it's just a matter of, making it as being as strong as possible and not carrying weight that he doesn't need.
There's got to be a Statcast search or a Savant search we can do to find like the players with the longest singles hit. You know what I mean? Over the last couple of years, I wonder where Vladdy ranks on those leaderboards. He might
he's
be
up
up
there.
there. Wonder if we would see Kendrys Morales up there as well a couple years back. Because that's like my one. Well, not my one memory, but that's a big memory for me from the Kendrys Morales era. Was like how many times he would scorch a ball like as if it was going to go through the wall in the outfield, and it would clank off the wall and it would be coming back to the infield before he was even like grounding first. Sometimes you can hit the ball too hard, I guess. I don't know. So about all of that, I think the biggest thing with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., honestly, and I know we've been talking like a lot about mentality and mental approach during this episode, and that is just maybe where my head is at these days, just thinking a lot about the psychology of the game and just life in general. Like honestly, a year into the pandemic is like,
Oh yeah,
I don't know about you, things get a little squirrely, man. So like I think that just the maturity side of it and the mental side of it's going to be the biggest thing for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Like the physical gains, like are going to be great, and those should help. And it's just like with anything, right? Like if you are in better physical shape, you are going to be, a little bit better at whatever it is that you do. And if you are taking your nutrition more seriously and your recovery more seriously and your conditioning more seriously, like yes, you're going to feel better, and you're probably going to perform better. But I think really it is just like that maturity and that ownership that you were talking about and that accountability and just the fact that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is growing up, and he gets compared to like the Acunas of this world and the Sotos of this world, the Tatises of this world, who like at 19 were able to just like step in and own the big leagues. That's kind of the exception to the rule, man. That's pretty rare. It's a pretty high standard to hold the guy up to. We forget. I know people get tired of us saying this. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is so damn young. He's 21 years old. He hasn't yet turned 22. Like think about how young you think like a Nate Pearson is. Nate Pearson's like 24.
Yeah.
You know?
Kevin Biggio is like 26.
Yeah. Like Vlad is 21.
Yeah.
Where you just have to think about yourself and what you were like at 21 and how many of us were like fully formed adults with like great habits and great understandings of, how to be our best. And when you're that young, particularly when you're as like talented innately as Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is, you can get by on that just like pure talent. That's how Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was able to like absolutely decimate AA pitching. And even in the brief time they spent in AAA, they made AAA look like a video game, and had us coming on here being like, call him up, he's got to be in the big leagues. And the Blue Jays, clearly because they knew that he wasn't quite mature enough to prepare himself well enough for major league seasons, we're kind of pumping the brakes on that a little bit. And like we can get into the push pull of all that if we want to, but I think just like that's the biggest development for me with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is just like that mentality and that maturity that we are seeing from him, because I do think that is a huge factor that he needs to unlock in order to fulfill his potential, which remains one of the best hitters in the game.
For sure. The potential is absolutely there when you look at it, just how hard he hits the ball, and not many guys can do that. It's pretty exceptional still. I think all of that makes sense. And to get to this point is big, and he's going to have to keep doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the challenge right now is he can't, in the course of spring training, put on another 15 pounds, and he can't, and as the season develops, he can't stop doing his preparation work or his core work or his stabilizing work. Like, it's tougher in the season. Obviously, the rhythm of it changes, but he's got to keep doing this, and that's going to be an ongoing challenge for him. And some guys, like, they're it's just it they have these great habits, and someone like Kevin Biggio, like, I think it comes pretty naturally to him, probably because he grew up around the game with a dad who, um but then again, Vladdy did too. It's just, I guess it's
Yeah.
just personal. It's just, it comes down to what experiences you take in, how that shapes you. And so Vladdy's having to make a change, because obviously what he was doing last year did not work. And so that change now has to be continued.
And it's like, it's almost cliche to talk about how, well, it is. It's cliche to talk about how best shape of your life is a cliche. The cliche is a cliche, but base expectation for every player, I think, in Blue Jays camp should be that you are reporting in better shape than you ended the
Oh
previous
yeah.
season at. So, you're hearing a
Yeah.
lot of it about not just Vlad, Alejandro Kirk, right? Bo Bichette, Charlie Montoya was talking about the size of his legs the other day. But like that should just be the expectation for all players, because you're taken out of that daily grind, right?
Yeah.
And just when you get down to just like the actual physical processes that it takes to like build muscle and like lose body fat, it's going to be a lot easier to execute on those when you're not playing a baseball game every night.
Yeah.
You're not getting on a flight across the continent every 3 days and getting into hotels at 4 in the morning, and there's no good options to eat at, and you're not sleeping and you're not recovering, and you're not able to put like the amount of like hypertrophic volume in the gym that it takes to actually build muscle, and then actually recover from it and sleep properly. Like, you can't do that during a big league season. Every player is going to lose muscle mass, I would assume, during a big league season. Like, maintaining is like great. If you just maintain your body composition, amazing. It's during the off season where you actually make your gains and you actually make that progress. So, to me, like, every player should be reporting in great shape for every spring training.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, that's their job. And this
Yeah.
is, in this day and age with so many resources available to these guys, and it's still a bit thinner on the minor league side, but if you're a major league player, you're on the 40 man, you got all kinds of resources. So there should be no excuse for not showing up in great shape, which, by the looks of it, most of these guys are in great shape. That doesn't guarantee them anything, because I guarantee that if we were looking at the Baltimore Orioles or the Pittsburgh Pirates, probably those guys are in good shape too. They're just not going
Yeah.
to play as well.
It's funny, we only talk about the players who, we were expecting to make those improvements. Like, I saw a photo the other day of Teoscar Hernandez, and I
Yeah.
was like, this dude is bricked up. He
Yeah.
did some work over the offseason, right?
I
We don't
know.
talk
George
about him.
Springer. I know.
Yeah,
Like
George
these,
Springer is
yeah,
huge.
these guys are jacked. Like, but again, that's like, I don't cover football, never have. I know you follow the sport more closely than me, but I bet if you show up to day one of NFL training camp, probably those guys are pretty massive and in perfect shape too.
Yeah. So, it's funny that it's just the preconceived notions that kind of come into it. But I think that I think the Blue Jays have a lot of players who came into camp in good shape.
Yeah.
And that's what you want, because the organization has like sort of laid the groundwork to give them all the resources needed to not have these detrimental like off seasons where they aren't getting better and aren't making gains. And I think that the player development complex that's being revealed on Thursday is a big part of that. We spoke about earlier, there's a group of Blue Jays who train there throughout the off season. And I think that as an organization, you would much rather that Nate Pearson is training under your roof with your folks using your facilities and not going off the drive line and not feeling like he has to go somewhere off site to make the gains he's trying to make. Jordan Romano, last year went to Kinetic Pro in Tampa to work out there because the Blue Jays didn't have the same facilities and didn't have the same abilities to help him advance and help him become like this back end of the bullpen weapon. Well, he spent all winter training out the Blue Jays player development complex, like, so I think that's a massive benefit of the renovation and of, the photos that we're seeing of these new facilities. And I think it was certainly a big benefit in recruiting a player like a George Springer and a guy like a Marcus Simeon, but more so Springer is going to spend, multiple years here, and you would assume be using it in the off season. But the greatest benefit of all of it is not for today's stars and today's big leaguers. It's for the future big leaguers. And it's for the minor leaguers who are going to be using that facility throughout the regular season when the big leaguers leave. This year they're not leaving. This year they're staying. But in a normal environment, leave to go off to Rogers Center in Toronto. It's for the minor leaguers who are going to be playing on the complex team that's going to be playing out of there. It's for the newly drafted players who are going to go through orientations at that facility. It's for players who might be struggling at double A or high A. Their velocity is diminished, or mentally they're going through it, or just not seeing the results that they should be. And they're taken out of that competitive environment and brought to the complex for a week or two to just do a developmental block and just focus on that for a week or two, clear their head, sort out whatever mechanical adjustments or physical things they're dealing with, like just get that cleared and then re-enter the competitive atmosphere of the minor league grind after that with like a fresh start and a clear head. Like, I think that could be a really positive thing that the organization could do in the future. And it's always tough because no player wants to leave games, right? No player wants to leave competition every night, and there's no agent wants to see their player taken out of that either. So there's a lot of stakeholders that have to be looked at there. But sometimes, like, it does take a step back to take two steps forward instead of continuing to sort of grind through a minor league season in which you're not seeing the results that you want to, and in which you don't have your velocity and you're only making things worse.
Totally. So it's really interesting, this player development complex. And by the time people are listening to this, probably a lot of our listeners will have seen some of the photos of what it looks like and how it's going to be different than what it was before. But Arden, I mean, for you and me, we've obviously not seen the new one up close, but we certainly spent a lot of time at the old setup. So, in your mind, as you were kind of looking at these photos, what were some of the contrasts that jumped out to you as far as what it used to be like and what it's like now?
I mean, sheer scale is the big one. Like, having been at the Matic center on the minor league side, and I've been in that gym and I've been in that training room. I mean, it's there are high schools that had better facilities. It was one of the worst.
Like, seriously, you're not even exaggerating.
No, yeah, I'm not exaggerating at all. It was one of the worst in Major League Baseball, and the Blue Jays have converted it into one of the best. And, like, think about spring training for minor leaguers when you got, now there's fewer minor leaguers in the organization, but you're still going to have like 180 of them. Think about having, all those players filtering through there in this tiny cramped gym, and, you got lineups for the squat racks, and guys are in people's way, and this guy's using this thing. And you got one minor league strength coach who's trying to like program workouts for all these guys, and he doesn't have enough room for everybody to do things. And it's just like a fiasco. Like, I've talked to minor leaguers who've been like, yeah, it's just like mayhem in there during spring training. Now there actually is room for everybody to do what they need to do. Not to mention, like, during pandemic times when spacing out is actually like a protocol and actually something that players are required to do. So, like, that's a huge benefit, having the covered spaces outdoors so that you can keep training on inclement weather days is a big one. The sports science stuff is huge. I mean, all of it is obvious, not just where the sport's going, but like where it's been going for a number of years. In a lot of ways, the Blue Jays are catching up, and with this, they have caught up. And I think they hope they can kind of spin this forward and kind of try to win the next sports science arms race.
Yeah, it's a pretty legit facility. I think it's kind of, you mentioned being a little bit more squirrely these days, and obviously a year into essentially a long quarantine. I mean, you see a spot like this, like that gym. I'm after trying to do crunches and on my own floor, I'm like, wow, that looks legit.
Yeah.
It looks really nice. And even, I mean, we've been inside the complex, the old spot where they had the cafeteria for players. And it was, as I recall, it was a windowless room. It's probably about the size of like your standard Canadian schoolroom, like classroom, just not super big. And then you look at just some of the details in this facility. They have these massive cafeterias, of course, with windows, outdoor dining spaces. They've got a barber shop in there. They've got massive, massive weight rooms that are well lit, well spaced out, treadmills upstairs. Um, Even little details like on the walls, they've got the banners hanging, of course. Then they've got, this is definitely cheesy, but I also noticed it. They've got kind of blank banners as well in
I saw that.
anticipation of the
Yeah.
future pennants that the Blue Jays will win. So, it's cheesy, but it catches the eye. And there's just a lot more scale, a lot more attention to detail at the new place.
Think about Austin Martin, who spent the last 3 years of his life playing at Vanderbilt University. And as a fan, if you have not, like, looked into Vanderbilt University's baseball program, it's essentially a professional program. The kids just don't get paid. You look at the facilities that they are using at Vanderbilt, and you can see it online, man,
Look at the
like
players.
yeah, yeah, I know. Look at the Kumar Rockers of the
Jack
world.
Leiter. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I
Those
know.
guys are better than the Orioles.
Oh, yeah, you could put, Rocker into the Blue Jays pitching staff today.
Number 3.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's
But,
Slatter. Watch out.
uh, but you look at the way these guys have been training and working and living and eating and recovering and the facilities they have, exposure to. You were gonna take a guy out of that environment and put him into the Bobby Maddox Center, right, is a significant downgrade. And so, like, that's the worst thing you can do developmentally, is take a guy who's trying to acclimatize to a higher level of competition and who's trying to, like, face professionals and face, in Austin Martin's case, an alternate site, big leaguers at this point, but have him do it without the resources that he's been leaning on for years, without feeling like his best, like, that's not what you want to do. And even for, and this is like super big picture, but you look at how MLB has kind of executed this like hostile takeover of the minor leagues, right? And like, basically MLB controls the minor leagues
Yep.
now, and they have culled 40 teams, and dozens and dozens of minor leaguers have been released. A lot of people have lost their jobs. Like, it's a bad thing. There's less baseball being played.
Yeah.
There's fewer towns with affiliated baseball. Like, I think it hurts the game at a grassroots level. But the calculus that big league teams are doing, is that these are not smooth transitions to professional baseball. What we've been doing, taking high schoolers out of the draft, taking 18-year-old amateurs out of Venezuela and the Dominican Republic, and sending them to these small towns with inadequate facilities and stretched resources. And like, maybe we can get a coordinator out there, but we don't really have, like, necessarily the boots on the ground that we want to in order to facilitate that development. That this isn't really fostering, advancement and development. This isn't helping us, most efficiently and effectively produce future big leaguers. And it's a tough thing to talk about, because I think there is like a significant cost savings element to that as well. MLB teams are always looking for efficiencies. What's efficiency mean? Spending less money, doing more with less. But I think that there is a very legitimate developmental argument for the fact that the affiliated structure as it was, and the way that teams transition players out of being amateurs to professionals, was inadequate, and that we will see better, smoother development going forward, with more of a reliance on a complex system and like an academy style training, and that the Blue Jays have actually positioned themselves really well for that with the opening of the new complex.
For sure. And I think even on a day-to-day level, for most people, they're going to get their work done in a more productive way, and maybe more creative way, more efficient way, whatever the demands of your work are. If you like your office and you feel comfortable in it, then you're probably going to get better work done. And that's, a point in favor of having these nice workspaces. And that's what this is. This is a workspace for these guys. And it strikes me as an outside observer who has yet to see it in person, but based on what we have seen, it strikes me as the kind of place where you could definitely get some pretty good work done. It would be a place that you could go to and You have your food taken care of. You've got space. You've got all the resources that you need to work out, to watch video, to have, private meetings with a coach if you want to review some footage, whatever the case. All those options are there. It's probably better than being in a space that's cramped and just don't have quite enough room, and the media's, let's set aside the media, actually. That's a whole other discussion. But, you've got, a much better working environment for these players, and you have to think that that will help.
Yeah, you just gotta remember, like, everything the Toronto Blue Jays do is developmentally minded. These are player development guys. Like, that is the roots of this entire thing, and that's a lot of what's been happening over for the last 5 years. Is just setting this organization up to better develop big league talent. Because, like, look, we don't have to tell anybody. You look at the best teams across MLB, or you look at kind of the model franchises, whether it's like the Dodgers or the Astros, or even like the San Diego Padres. They've built that like major league roster right now mostly via trading young players that they developed internally in order to acquire win now talent. But they still have a top 10 system. Like, they still have a wealth of young talent coming up that's going to supplement that roster, and that's going to allow them to have like a pretty regenerative winning cycle, that's going to bring them that sort of sustainable winning that we hear Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins talk about all the time. Like, so the Blue Jays are just have spent the last 5 years trying to kind of lay that bedrock of a player development system that's going to allow them to have something similar to what the Dodgers have, or what the Astros have. And I think the complex is going to be huge for that. As fans, you're not necessarily going to see these orientation processes for recently drafted players, but we're talking like, weeks at a time of, for high schoolers coming out of the United States who maybe didn't have access to a ton of education on nutrition or training. There's going to be a lot of work that's going to go into that. For international prospects, it's going to be like language lessons and like getting accustomed to the culture shock of coming over to the United States and leaving your family behind in Venezuela or wherever you're coming out of. Like, I just think for young players, it's going to be like capturing everything that you do biomechanically with like motion capture sensors and high speed cameras and Rapsodos and all this stuff to try and help you get better and try to produce future big leaguers, because that is what sustains any successful organization. Certainly, like, a big payroll helps, and going out into free agency like the Dodgers did with Trevor Bauer, like, that helps. That's going to make them better. But what's really made them good over the last several years has been Cody Bellinger and Corey Seager and Kenley Jansen. And here comes Dustin May and all these homegrown produced players from a player development system that is just churning them out. And that's what the Blue Jays are trying to build.
Right. And if you're a fan and you're listening to this or watching and thinking, I don't care.
I don't care.
Like, I
I know.
don't care.
Dude, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person in the world who cares about this stuff.
And
Go ahead.
some fans will care and some fans
Yeah.
won't. And for those who don't care, thanks for bearing with us this far. But and that's fine. Like,
Yeah.
it's it doesn't. I totally understand that it's more so.
We should have just done batting order projections, man. That's what people want.
Right.
It's what people want. George Springer should hit first. No,
So,
Kevin Biggio should hit first. Go ahead.
there's a limit to necessarily how exciting this is for fans. I think it's interesting, but ultimately these teams are judged by wins and losses, and that's going to be the case for the Blue Jays, because the best one of these player development spring training complexes that I've ever seen exists in Arizona. Salt River Fields, Colorado, and Arizona share it. It is gorgeous. I mean, it is like incredible from an aesthetic standpoint. It's far superior to Dunedin, Florida. From a functionality standpoint, I can't say. Both seem great, but the Colorado Rockies are kind of like the last team in baseball. Like, they're kind of the laughing stock, if there is such a thing in Major League Baseball right now. And so having a great development facility only gets you so far. You have to be able to use it in the right way. You still have to make good trades. The players still have to perform. That all remains true with the Blue Jays. And so this is one ingredient for this team, and we'll see where it leads. But certainly, it's better to have it than not.
No, yeah, you've gotta hire the right folks. You gotta put the right developers in place. It's kinda like baseball's kinda data revolution. Like, look, every team has spin rates now, and spin
Yeah,
efficiencies and biomechanical data. Like, every team has the information. Every team has the scouting and analysis. It's how do you deploy it? How do you communicate it to the players?
totally. Or even
Like,
seeing like the New York Times article about how baseball execs are reading Thinking Fast and Slow. And I'm like, if you're reading that now, like you're kind of behind the times.
oh,
Not that
yeah.
it's not it's a great book, highly recommend it. But like if you're reading that in 2021, like probably not cutting edge.
No, that's what the Astros were using, like, in, 2012 or 2013, like, when, Luna was first putting in a lot of the data-driven player development stuff that every team is trying to catch up to now. And the Astros went through that competitive cycle. Like, George Springer was a production of that, and Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman, like, and the Astros went to the LCS 4 or 5 years in a row based off of some of those philosophies. So, I don't know. Yeah, look, people can go read the MVP machine, and
Yeah.
they'll get their fix. But so let's give people one like kind of trendy Blue Jays thing as we go. Bo Bichette extension. Because it was kind of interesting to hear Bichette talk about Fernando Tatis's 14-year, $340 million extension with the San Diego Padres that he signed at 22 as a shortstop. Bo Bichette, also a 22-year-old shortstop, hasn't had the big league career that Fernando Tatis has had, certainly, but has had a pretty dang good one. And if he had, hadn't had a couple of unfortunate injuries, like who knows what his numbers would look like right now. But what did you make of, the way Bo Bichette sort of responded to that extension and how he discussed it with us?
There's a lot to take away from that, honestly. I mean, I think that Bichette, one, just seems very composed and in control of the message that he wants to deliver, which not the case for every is he 22? How old is
22.
he? Yeah,
Yeah.
not the case for every 22-year-old. Um, but he was very much, candid as far as saying that he's open to that possibility and that the Blue Jays have had at least some talks, but never got to the point of making an offer to Bo Bichette. And I think that makes sense just where he's at and where they're at. The Blue Jays have 5 more years of Bichette. There's not a rush to figure this out. And probably even if he were to get close to free agency, this market is better equipped to bid on him in free agency and win than the Padres would be with Tatis. So that's, I think,
Yeah.
reduces some of the urgency. And Tatis is on another level. I mean, Bichette is a really good player, and he's had an all-star caliber start to his career. And in fact, there are only two shortstops through his age that have a higher OPS than Bo Bichette since integration. So you're talking about one, Fernando Tatis, two, Alex Rodriguez. Those are
I
the
was
only
trying to
two
think of who the other one
shortstops.
was. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
it's pretty rare
Yeah.
to do what he's done at his age. But Tatis has been significantly better. So even though Bichette has been great, Tatis has been on another level, just as far as the overall offensive production, the defense, and he's played more. So Bichette is not at that level now. I think it could get to that point. If Bichette goes out and has a 930 OPS this year and has a 6 WAR season, I mean, it's possible that this time next year, we're talking about a massive extension for Bo Bichette. But I don't think we're there now. And I think that's why it's just not quite the right time for those talks to really be taking place.
Yeah, each one of these situations is so interesting for how unique they each are because so you look at a guy like Bo Bichette, pretty confident kid, pretty willing to bet on himself. Also a guy whose old man did okay for himself in the big leagues. Probably I don't have it in front of me, but many, many millions of dollars of career earnings for Dante Bichette. So I think the Bichette family is going to be a-okay going forward. And that gives Bo Bichette, along with the big bonus, by the way, that he signed in the draft, the ability to bet on himself and to feel a bit more comfortable doing that. Now, Ronald Acuna coming out of Venezuela on like a $100,000 bonus. And, I don't know the exact particulars of his upbringing, but I would assume that he did not enjoy the same level of privilege that a Bo Bichette
Yeah.
did. He gets an absurdly team friendly extension put in front of him and he inks it. And he does the Atlanta Braves a massive favor with that deal. The players union had to hate that deal. Um, I don't see Bo Bichette taking any kind of a deal that is going to look like anything even close to a discount. And that's the thing with these extension talks, for players like that, is you need to find a way to share risk between both sides, and you need to find a way to, like in any negotiation, create value for both sides. And I promise you that the San Diego Padres see some value at some point in this Tatis extension. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed him to it. Tatis clearly saw the value of it. Maybe he could have done better if he had gone year to year. And Bo Bichette kind of alluded to that a little
Yeah,
bit.
he said it. He said it straight up. He
Yeah,
said that,
right.
and so did Marcus Simeon. I mean, and
He's
they're not wrong.
Yeah. But clearly Tatis saw that value. I just think for Bichette to see the value in the deal, like, it is gonna have to be substantial. And I just don't know that the Blue Jays in turn then will see that value on their side if they're gonna get close to what it would take to sign Bo Bichette, pre-arbitration at this point.
These deals have changed. I mean, the game has changed. And Mark Shapiro and John Hart back in Cleveland in the 90s
The
were at the
OGs of
oh
the
yeah,
extension.
they
Yeah.
were at the forefront of this with guys like Carlos Baerga and Charles Nagy. Sandy Alomar Jr. I think got one. So these deals were essential for that team. They had great attendance at the time, but still a small market team. And it helped them sustain their success for a long period of time. Then the Rays copied it. And I mean, you look at some of those Rays deals. Evan Longoria, this is 2008, I think. He signed a $17 million deal that gave the Rays control for like multiple free agent years, all these options, like very little guaranteed money. It was an incredible deal. Maybe the most team friendly deal that I can think of in my entire time covering baseball.
I'll put that into
It's,
perspective really
yeah,
quickly. The Acuna deal that I was just crapping
yeah,
all over, that's like 17 million per season.
exactly.
Right? And that's
Yeah.
absurdly team friendly. This was 17 million total.
It's incredible. And they did similar deals with James Shields and later with Chris Archer and Blake Snell. They did one with Zobrist. Like, that's when Friedman was doing those deals in Tampa. Like, it's no wonder they were able to make it to the World Series in '08. It's no wonder that they've remained competitive since then. These are like massive, and it works against the players, but from a team standpoint, these are huge creators of value that then translate into trades if you want, or translate into the ability to spend elsewhere and make a mistake on a free agent. Like, it's incredibly valuable. And at some point, the Players Association picked up on that and said, maybe it's not a good idea for Evan Longoria, this like college player who's clearly going to be good, to just sign away everything the first time someone comes around and offers him 17 or 20 million bucks. And gradually we've seen those types of deals stop and slow down. And I guarantee if the Blue Jays made Austin Martin, to name one example, they offered him a 6-year, $22 million deal. He's saying no. Like,
Yeah.
that is a no. That is a non-starter. And for Bo Bichette, who's already had success, the price is way beyond that. And so it's, more power to the players if they want to wait it out and see what they can do here. I don't think that those same types of deals are available to teams anymore by and large. But it does create these interesting dynamics now when both sides have a lot at stake going into the next year or so. And of course, if you're the Blue Jays, you want Bo Bichette to go well, to play well, force your hand, put himself in a position where he is potentially commanding that kind of money, because it means he has then reached his ceiling as an all-star contributor.
Such a can of worms, dude. Like you said, with upcoming CBA negotiations, right?
Yeah.
So this ties into that from both a team and player perspective. Because from a team perspective, it's like, all right, what's service time going to look like in 2022, 2023, right? Like,
I'd assume
how
mostly the same, but yeah.
Yeah, right? Like, like, it does change the calculus a little bit of, how you would extend a player, how many free agent years you're buying out, like,
Yep.
just even what just the economics of baseball, like, what a salary cap might look like if that was a possibility, or a salary floor. Like, just there's a lot of mechanisms that could change going forward, and that would change how you'd feel about a potential extension. That's one reason why I think it's like pretty unlikely
Mhm.
that it happens. Another one from the players' side, yeah, like Bo Bichette, pretty clearly, and particularly now that he's rubbing shoulders with like a Marcus Simeon and a George Springer, who, by the way, was one of the most blatant examples of service time manipulation we have seen. Now that he's rubbing shoulders with these guys, he's not going to want to like be the guy who think about his dad as well, who was pretty involved in the union. He doesn't want to be the guy to sign that absurdly team friendly Evan Longoria deal.
He's just not going to. It's
Right?
just not going to happen.
It's just not going to be him. So like for all these reasons, it's so hard to see these two sides lining up. And I do think like this might be kind of Pollyannish, but like for an extension like this, like the Tatis deal, you want it to be a partnership, right? Like you want both sides to actually see the benefit of it. You're sharing risk always in one of these extensions, right? Whether it's injury risk, underperformance risk. If you're a player, the risk is that, hey, I'm going to be really, really phenomenally good, and I could have made a lot more money in free agency or even year to year in ARB. You're always going to be sharing risk, but I think that you do want both sides to actually see the value in it and see the benefit in it. Like, I don't think you want this to be like an acrimonious negotiation or an antagonistic thing. Like that's the best way to like just kibosh negotiation, is to treat it as like a zero-sum exercise and to be antagonistic with each other instead of like being empathetic and understanding what the other side wants out of the deal and trying to find ways to create value so that both sides can get something out of this agreement. It's hard to see that lining up with the Blue Jays and Bichette right now. And like one other point that I would make that you kind of raised is the no offer thing. Like, yeah, the Blue Jays would never offer that deal to Austin Martin. They would never offer an insulting deal to Bo Bichette. So when you hear Bo Bichette come out and say like, oh, we had talks, but there was no offer, there's there's a way to spin that of like, they didn't even make an offer. Like, remember the David Price thing when he was a free agent? Oh, they didn't even offer David Price a contract. Well, they're not going to insult these players. Like, you're going to get a gauge through discussions of what expectations are. You're not going to insult somebody by coming in with a super low ball offer and say like, hey, maybe you'll be dumb enough to take this. That's not the way to do business in 2021. And that's not the way to keep one of the most important members of your franchise happy going forward. So, like I said, a real can of worms.
It is. And right now, functionally, Bo Bichette is on a 1-year, $600,000 contract with 4 team options. Yeah. That's what it means to be a pre-arb player. Yeah. So we don't talk about it in those terms, but essentially, from any sort of functional standpoint, 1-year deal, 4 club options. So that's pretty good for the Jays. Like, they don't need to go out of their way right now and rush to do something to shake that up. Of course, they want Bo Bichette beyond the next 5 years, but having him for 5 is still pretty good.
The rubber will meet the road eventually, not just with Bichette, with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., with Nate Pearson, perhaps with Austin Martin and Jordan Groshans, when it's like guys are going year to year in ARB. And if they have been as good as they believe they will be, as the Blue Jays want them to be, because if they're that good, that means the Blue Jays are probably a pretty damn good team and probably contending for World Series. If they've been that good and they put up that level of production, well, yeah, they're going to start getting pricey through ARB, and they're going to start approaching free agency, and the Blue Jays will have to make a decision about whether they want to extend them into free agency and keep a good young core together, or if they're going to be like the Houston Astros and say, hey, thanks for your service, George Springer, thanks for your 7 years, but off you go to Toronto, to another organization. We have reaped the surplus value of your early career production for years and years, and we will be happy to let someone else pay you $25 million a year for your decline.
Well, yeah, and let's hope nobody ever accuses At the Letters of not having foresight, because here we are talking about the free agency of players who have yet to make their major league debuts. Yeah. So we are looking ahead. We like to cast far ahead here.
Well, wouldn't this be the perfect time to extend Austin Martin right now before he makes his big league debut? Right?
Yeah. And
if the earlier, the better, really.
Honestly,
from a team perspective.
Scott Boras is saying no. Boras is his advisor, agent. But if he had a different agent, someone you thought you could, let's call it like it is, manipulate, then I would make him an offer that was very team friendly and see if he took it. And maybe that agent wants that commission and is willing to, maybe that agent would just have a different set of.
It's a lot of zeros criteria on that check, man.
Yeah, exactly. 5% of 20 million still sounds pretty good to me.
Yep. It's like a real estate agent, like selling, selling a multi-million dollar house in Toronto. It's like at a certain point, it's like, yeah, 5%.
It adds up.
Yeah, that does add up. Could be a volume-based business. I think that's going to be it for us this week on At the Letters. Next week, hopefully, I have some more happenings from Blue Jays camp to talk about, so we don't have to have all these abstract discussions about baseball and about the organization and where things are going. But we appreciate you as always for listening. We appreciate our producers, Mike Tassoni and Christian Ryan. And hey, spring training has begun. The season has begun. So that means At the Letters is going to be here every week through the rest of spring training, through the 2021 season, as Ben and I slowly go mad covering a baseball season from our kitchens.
That's right. That's right.
So you can listen to that wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch that on YouTube, and you can read us at sportsnet.ca. Until next time, thanks for listening. This has been At the Letters.